Teacher asked, "Why is your son absent?" "But I just dropped him off." There are moments in life when everything feels ordinary, when the rhythm of the day hums so predictably that we forget how fragile our sense of control truly is. The father, like so many of us, trusted in his morning routine. Each day began the same way: the soft hum of the engine, the short drive to school, the reassuring sight of his son walking through those familiar gates. It was a small ritual that brought comfort, a silent prayer wrapped in the mundane. But spirituality teaches us that the illusion of safety can sometimes become the veil that hides life's deepest lessons. Behind every act of routine lies the mystery of the unknown, the sacred unpredictability of existence that asks us to trust something greater than habit. In that quiet morning, before the storm broke, the father was certain of one thing: that his child was safe. That certainty was his peace. Yet, the universe often shakes us awake when we've become too comfortable in our patterns. The illusion of routine is a reminder that spiritual awareness requires presence, not autopilot. Life is not measured by how many mornings pass smoothly, but by how we respond when the smooth becomes rough, when the predictable turns into chaos. In those cracks of uncertainty, the soul begins to listen. When Mrs. Stevenson's voice broke the morning calm, "Why is your son absent today?" It was not just a question, it was the universe speaking through human lips. That single moment shattered the illusion. The father's heart, once steady, began to tremble as disbelief gave way to dread. And yet, beneath the panic, a deeper truth stirred: that sometimes pain is not a punishment, but a summons. The divine uses disruption to bring awareness, to pull us back into the present moment where real seeing begins. In that instant of fear, the father was invited into a spiritual confrontation between trust and control, faith and panic. His heart raced, but within that racing heart was an awakening. Spiritual growth rarely begins in comfort, it begins in crisis. It was in that very confusion that the father's spirit began to expand, preparing him to face what was hidden, to uncover what the universe needed him to see. Sometimes, enlightenment doesn't arrive in meditation or silence. It begins with a teacher's simple question that shakes the soul awake. In the great web of life, every soul, every system, and every institution plays a role in shaping the collective energy of our world. The school, once seen as a sacred space of learning, trust, and safety, failed to notice what was unfolding right before its eyes. Spiritually, this is not just a story about negligence, it's a reflection of humanity's tendency to drift into unconscious living. The administrative blind spots that caused harm are mirrors of our own spiritual blind spots, the moments when we overlook truth because paperwork, rules, or appearances seem more convenient than awareness. In every form filled, every signature trusted, the spirit of discernment was missing. The soul's wisdom whispers that true vigilance does not come from policy, but from presence, from the ability to see not just with the eyes, but with the heart. The outdated contact information, the unchecked forms, the silent acceptance, all of it represents how structures lose connection with the human spirit when they stop evolving. In spiritual terms, stagnation invites suffering. A form can never replace a conversation, a database can never hold compassion. The divine law of awareness reminds us that routine without consciousness breeds blindness. The staff trusted the system more than their intuition, more than the subtle signals that something was amiss. The lesson here is profound. Even the most organized institutions can fail when empathy is absent. Spiritual responsibility asks us to not just do our duty, but to feel it, to act as guardians of one another's souls, not just managers of tasks. When trust becomes automatic instead of conscious, it weakens the moral fabric that connects us. The teachers assumed the paperwork was legitimate because they wanted to believe in the goodness of the process. Yet spirituality teaches that blind trust without awareness is not faith, it is sleep. The family-authorized excuses that went unquestioned reveal how easily we surrender discernment in the name of convenience. Real trust must be balanced by wisdom. Just as light needs shadow to reveal form, trust needs vigilance to sustain truth. The school's failure to notice was not just a procedural gap, it was a collective forgetting of spiritual attentiveness. When we stop truly seeing one another, pain finds its way through the cracks. Awareness is divine protection, and every soul, every teacher, every system is called to awaken to it. Sometimes, the most devastating truths are not hidden in darkness, but stand quietly in the light, disguised as normal. Spirituality teaches us that illusion often wears the face of familiarity, that the greatest deceptions are not born in shadows, but in the spaces where we stop paying attention. The hidden kidnapping was not merely a crime against a child, it was a symbol of how unconsciousness can turn safety into danger, trust into betrayal. It reminds us that the world is layered, physical, emotional, spiritual, and that to live awake is to look beyond what the eyes see. When we rely only on appearances, we risk missing the deeper signals that something sacred is being stolen right before us. The camera footage showing Theo scanning his ID badge was like watching a ritual of false assurance. Each morning, that simple act gave his father peace, a technological symbol of safety. But as the lens followed the boy turning toward the gym, the illusion shattered. Spiritually, this moment speaks to how often we place faith in systems, routines, and objects instead of cultivating awareness within. The badge, the camera, the school, all seemed to offer protection, yet they reflected how society often outsources vigilance to machines while neglecting inner intuition. The soul whispers long before tragedy speaks, through subtle unease, through intuition, through the quiet pull that something is off. The footage was not just evidence of wrongdoing, it was a revelation of how far we can drift from spiritual attentiveness when we replace mindful presence with mechanical assurance. When the man in the construction vest, Uncle Mike, appeared on the screen, the heartbreak deepened. The betrayal was not from a stranger, but from someone cloaked in the comfort of family. Spiritually, this is one of life's hardest lessons. Not all who wear the face of kinship carry the spirit of love. Manipulation disguised as care, control masquerading as guidance. These are the darker shadows of the human heart. Uncle Mike's deception mirrors a universal truth. When love loses integrity, it becomes exploitation. The soul must learn discernment, to see with both compassion and clarity, to recognize when trust is being used as a tool of harm. In every hidden act of cruelty, the light of truth still waits to be seen. And once seen, it demands awakening, not just to protect, but to transform awareness into action. This is the soul's calling, to never look away again. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when fear replaces reason, and the heart races faster than the mind can think. For the father, that moment came as he drove through the city, every red light a lifetime, every minute a plea to the divine for mercy. Panic, in its rawest form, can be both destructive and sacred. It shatters illusions and pulls us into absolute presence. In spirituality, crisis is not the enemy of faith, it is often its birthplace. The father's desperate drive through twisting streets was more than a search for his son. It was a spiritual awakening, a baptism by fire that stripped him of control and forced him into complete surrender. When logic failed, prayer began. Not the gentle kind whispered in peace, but the desperate one shouted through tears, "Please, let me find him." In that cry, the human heart meets the divine, and awareness blooms through anguish. Every turn of the wheel was a meditation on urgency. Each dead end was a test of endurance. Yet beneath the chaos, there was a strange clarity, the kind that comes only when the soul is utterly stripped bare. Spirituality often teaches stillness, but in this storm, movement became the prayer. The father's pursuit through the streets was not driven by rage alone. It was guided by an unseen force, intuition, divine pull, the whisper of love that transcends fear. Sometimes, the soul finds its truest alignment not in silence, but in motion, when purpose burns brighter than confusion. Every failed stop was not wasted. It was a lesson in faith's persistence, that, even when doors close, the divine is still directing the path forward. When he finally saw Theo, small, fragile, burdened under the weight of a cement bag, the father's heart broke in ways words cannot hold. Yet, amid the pain, there was revelation. This was not just the sight of human cruelty, it was the unveiling of truth. Seeing his ex-wife defend this exploitation as education revealed how distorted love can become when guided by fear, ego, or survival. Spiritually, this confrontation was more than anger, it was awakening. The father stood not only as a protector, but as a witness to the sacred duty of consciousness. True love does not enslave in the name of teaching. It frees, nurtures, and uplifts. The worksite became his altar of realization, that sometimes, love must roar to defend what is holy. And in that roar, the divine speaks through human courage. When chaos erupts in our lives, it is often followed by the intervention of structure, the arrival of systems, rules, and authorities. On the surface, it seems like a shift from the emotional to the procedural. Yet, from a spiritual lens, it is something deeper, the universe balancing itself, order rising out of disorder. The system stepping in was not merely a bureaucratic response, it was the manifestation of divine law, the unseen principle that justice, when delayed, still finds its way through human hands. Even in the noise of sirens and the shuffle of officers, there was something sacred taking shape. The presence of those who came to help represented the higher truth that the universe never abandons innocence. Help may not always come how we expect, but it comes precisely when the soul's cry reaches its loudest vibration. The flashing lights, the yellow tape, the paramedics bending over Theo, these were not just symbols of authority, but reflections of divine guardianship. In the spiritual sense, law enforcement here represents the energy of alignment, the correction that follows chaos. Every photograph taken, Every bruise documented, every text recorded was not just evidence for court, it was testimony for the soul. Truth, once buried, was now being seen, acknowledged, and honored. The process of documentation was a ritual of restoration, an act of bearing witness to suffering so that it might be transformed into justice. Spiritually, the moment law enforcement arrived was the universe saying enough. The darkness has been seen, and light will now take its place. When Child Protective Services shifted from suspicion to protection, it became a lesson in divine perspective. The same hands that once seemed poised to judge the father now extended to help him. This transformation shows that life systems, though human and flawed, can still act as channels of grace when truth reveals itself. The father's immediate cooperation was an act of spiritual surrender, a conscious choice to align with truth rather than fear. In spirituality, surrender is not weakness, it is the recognition that control belongs to a higher power. His trust, even amid pain, reshaped not only his case, but the energy surrounding it. Through his openness, compassion replaced accusation, and the story shifted from blame to healing. The system stepped in, yes, but beneath it all, it was spirit stepping through human form to restore balance, protect innocence, and remind us that love, when joined with truth, is the highest law of all. When truth begins to surface, it rarely does so in grand explosions. It rises quietly, piece by piece, as light seeps through the cracks of darkness. Spiritually, every investigation, whether done by police, by life, or by the self, is a sacred process of revelation. The walls that once protected lies now become mirrors reflecting the divine insistence on truth. What unfolds behind closed doors is not just a human pursuit of justice, it is the universe restoring harmony, showing that no falsehood can remain hidden forever. The hidden always comes to light, not to punish, but to heal what deception has wounded. The investigation expanding was, therefore, not merely procedural, it was spiritual justice in motion, the slow but certain unraveling of illusion so that truth could breathe again. Numbers on a bank statement, codes on a printer, images on a screen, all tools of the material world. Yet when seen through the spiritual lens, they become instruments of divine order. The paper trails and payment records did more than expose exploitation for profit, they revealed how greed blinds the human heart. Every transaction told a story of choice, moments when compassion was exchanged for convenience, when money became more important than morality. The printer codes and CCTV footage were not just forensic evidence, they were symbols of karma in physical form, the spiritual law that records every deed and brings balance through consequence. Spiritually, this phase of the investigation reminds us that the universe keeps perfect accounts. No action, however hidden, escapes the cosmic record. The truth will always leave footprints for those who seek with clean hands and open eyes. As warrants were issued and interviews conducted, a new rhythm took hold, not of chaos, but of accountability. The legal machinery is, in a deeper sense, the machinery of divine correction. Just as the human body heals by isolating infection, society heals by isolating wrongdoing. Each confession, each testimony, each confrontation was part of a cleansing ritual. Family bonds built on deceit were breaking apart, but in that breaking lay purification. Spiritually, when false foundations crumble, the soul gets its chance to rebuild on truth. The layers of conspiracy between family members showed how darkness multiplies when fear and greed unite, but also how quickly it unravels when light enters. What was hidden in secrecy now stood before divine order. And as the investigation deepened, so too did the father's faith that, even in humanity's mess, the universe is always working toward truth, restoration, and balance. Healing, in its truest form, is not only physical, it is a journey of the soul returning to wholeness. When a child experiences trauma, the spirit does not break, it simply retreats into silence, waiting for gentleness to call it back. Theo's journey of recovery is more than therapy sessions and medical care. It is the sacred process of a young soul remembering that safety, love, and light still exist in the world. The universe, in its compassion, always provides healers when hearts are wounded, people like Sophia Bailey, who hold space for broken spirits to breathe again. Spiritually, every act of listening, every moment of understanding, becomes a form of divine medicine. Healing is not about erasing the past, it is about transforming pain into wisdom and fear into faith. Inside the quiet room of therapy, Theo faced what many adults spend lifetimes avoiding, the act of looking inward. His nightmares and trembling at the sound of trucks were not just symptoms, they were the soul's way of speaking its pain. Through Sophia's gentle presence, Theo began to learn that words can cleanse wounds that bandages cannot reach. The fear of not being fast enough, the guilt imprinted by manipulation, were slowly unlearned through trust. Spiritually, this stage of his healing reminds us that trust is the first language of the soul. When love becomes a wound, the heart must relearn how to feel safe in the presence of kindness. Sophia's patience was not just therapy, it was divine energy at work, reminding Theo that compassion is the antidote to fear and that every tear shed consciously becomes a seed of renewal. As the days unfolded, small moments became sacred victories: the first laugh after silence, the first night of peaceful sleep, the first time Theo dared to play without looking over his shoulder. Routines, warm meals, and honest conversations rebuilt the invisible walls of trust. Spiritually, safety is not a place, it is a vibration, an energy that says, "You are protected now." Through his father's presence and Sophia's guidance, Theo's spirit began to stretch, to breathe, to return to light. Each smile that appeared on his face was a testimony of resilience, the soul's reminder that healing is always possible, no matter how deep the wound. Theo's smile became a prayer, silent but powerful proof that, even after darkness, the light of innocence can rise again, steady and whole. In the landscape of the spirit, redemption is not about erasing the past, it is about awakening within it. Every soul, no matter how lost, carries within it the seed of transformation. When pain is faced with honesty and accountability, it becomes the soil in which wisdom grows. This stage of the story is not merely about justice, it is about becoming. For both Maya and the father, the path forward is illuminated by the same light, the call to responsibility. Spirituality teaches that we are never defined by our worst actions, but by our willingness to rise after them. Redemption, then, is not granted, it is earned through humility, awareness, and the courage to change. Responsibility is the sacred bridge that connects remorse to renewal. Maya's journey toward redemption begins with her own reflection, not in a courtroom, but within the quiet corners of conscience. Confronting her choices, she must look into the mirror of her own soul and face what fear and desperation had blinded her to see. Spiritual awakening rarely comes through comfort, it comes through collapse. The parenting classes, the counseling, the supervised visits, these are not punishments, but sacred opportunities. Each one invites her to rediscover what true motherhood means, not possession, but protection, not control, but care. Through each session, the layers of denial begin to fall away, revealing the raw, painful truth that love without awareness can wound deeply. Spiritually, this reckoning is her chance to exchange guilt for growth. The divine does not demand perfection, only sincerity, the willingness to rebuild with honesty. In walking this path, Maya begins to understand that redemption does not erase the past, it transforms it into service and compassion. For the father, responsibility takes a different shape. His trial is not one of guilt, but of grace, learning how to carry anger without letting it consume him. Spiritually, anger is energy. When purified, it becomes purpose. Through therapy, parenting classes, and advocacy, he begins to channel his pain into protection for others. His emotional control is not suppression, but mastery, a quiet strength that allows healing to flow rather than resentment to fester. As he collaborates with the school and speaks for reform, he becomes an instrument of conscious change. The father's growth reveals the deepest truth of spirituality. Redemption is not limited to those who fall, but also embraces those who rise beyond reaction to embody wisdom. Both parents, in their own way, are learning that love and responsibility are not feelings, they are sacred commitments born from awareness. When a single tragedy shakes a system, it becomes an awakening not only for the individuals involved, but for the entire collective. Spiritually, institutions are reflections of the consciousness that builds and sustains them. A school is not merely a building, it is a living organism of human intention, carrying both light and shadow. When the system fails, it is a sign that awareness has fallen asleep within it. The universe, in its wisdom, often uses suffering as a mirror to awaken compassion and responsibility on a broader scale. Institutional reform, therefore, is not just an administrative correction, it is a spiritual realignment, a chance for the collective to return to integrity and awareness. What happened to Theo and his father became a catalyst for transformation, proving that pain can indeed be repurposed into purpose. The introduction of biometric IDs, exit door alarms, and parent verification systems was more than a technical upgrade, it was a manifestation of awakened consciousness through structure. Each new measure represented a shift from blind trust to mindful accountability. Spiritually, these reforms symbolize humanity's evolution toward awareness and action. The school district, once operating on assumptions, now moved with intention. Transparency became their new form of prayer, an offering to ensure that no other child's safety would be compromised by complacency. When systems evolve, it is the divine working through human hands, using practical wisdom as a vessel for compassion. Every alert, every verified contact, every alarm was an embodiment of vigilance born from love. The community was learning that safeguarding children is not only a professional duty, but a spiritual one, a sacred trust that demands presence, precision, and care. The father's decision to join the Safety Advisory Committee marked a profound shift from victimhood to stewardship. Spiritually, he had entered the realm of karmic transformation, where personal suffering becomes collective healing. His presence in those meetings carried more than ideas, it carried lived truth. By turning his grief into guidance, he became a channel through which the universe could create protection for others. This is the essence of spiritual service, to transform pain into prevention, despair into direction. His advocacy was not driven by revenge, but by responsibility, not by anger, but by awareness. The reforms he helped shape were acts of love disguised as policy. And in doing so, the father demonstrated that true healing is not only personal, it is communal. When one person's awakening inspires change in the many, the entire world takes one step closer to divine balance. Every spiritual journey passes through chaos before it reaches calm. What once felt like destruction often reveals itself, in time, as transformation. The storm that Theo and his father endured was not meant to break them, but to awaken something deeper, a sacred understanding of resilience, truth, and divine timing. Spiritually, chaos is the soul's way of shaking loose what no longer serves. It strips away illusion, forcing the heart to rebuild from authenticity. As the noise of legal battles and investigations quieted, what remained was not just justice, but clarity. The long road home is not merely a return to peace, it is a pilgrimage of becoming, where pain is alchemized into purpose and survival blossoms into strength. The final court rulings brought a long-awaited stillness. Papers were signed, verdicts delivered, boundaries established. Yet beneath the procedural calm, a spiritual truth pulsed. The law of cause and effect had completed its cycle. Those who harmed innocents faced accountability, not through vengeance, but through balance. The universe had restored order in its own rhythm, proving once more that justice is not always swift, but it is certain. Theo's safety was secured, his home now a sanctuary. His father, the steady presence the divine had prepared him to trust again. The bans, the fines, the sentences, all earthly manifestations of a higher principle, that no act of harm escapes the watchful eye of divine law. What was once chaos now stood contained, transformed into structure. And within that structure, the soul could finally breathe. As father and son sat together building the small dinosaur model, something sacred unfolded. Each piece they connected was more than plastic, it was symbolic of reconstruction, patience, and quiet persistence. Spiritual healing rarely happens in a rush, it is crafted one small act of love at a time. Theo's laughter returning, his trust rebuilding, his peace reawakening, these were miracles disguised as ordinary moments. The father, too, was healing not by forgetting the pain, but by learning how to live beyond it. Their shared creation represented a new covenant. Life would move forward gently, mindfully, and together. The dinosaur, ancient and enduring, became a symbol of resilience through ages, a reminder that even after extinction-like loss, life finds a way to rise again. From chaos to calm, they had not just come home to each other, they had come home to spirit, to truth, and to the quiet strength of love reborn.